trouble, it's not my fault. All this, I also lose my friends, I lost my baby. That is looking crack, only today want to change. He wanted so they couldn't try more like to feel. I'd kill the real, take your life in a second. The table drinks coffee in my kitchen, I mentioned eating every song, I just wanted to go away. You decide to stay in the well. I want to be forgiven, I don't like this kid for money. Sorry I was scared, you're not the way it feels. Like to sleep waiting for someone to come in and kill you. The final thing is that now I'm not afraid of anything. Cause they're gonna kill anyone that feels so powerful. They try by you every new skin of everything is confusing. You will be good but you will be more. You will be good but you will be more. You will be good but you will be more. Alone every day it is a praise of pleasure.
Good morning and welcome to Dynasty 365, where the film will set you free. Today we're going to go over the NFL news from Monday and Tuesday and how it will affect your Dynasty decisions. We'll talk about Miles Sanders' situation on the Philadelphia Eagles. We'll talk about what Miles brings to the table as a prospect. And then I'll give you my verdict on where he should be going in Dynasty rookie drafts. In the news, Ben Watson, tight end for the New England Patriots, has been suspended the first 4 games of the season for violating their performance-enhancing drug policy. Apparently, the Patriots already knew about this, but the Patriots did change his contract structure to help him make up lost money. This just pretty much means that Austin Seferian-Jenkins is going to be more useful for 4 weeks of the season, and then it will most likely be a timeshare with Ben Watson. I wouldn't trust any of them to actually produce consistent numbers this year. Marvin Jones is not practicing fully yet during OTAs. He's, of course, the Lions' first or second string receiver, depending on how you view Kenny Golladay. But he had a bone bruise last year, which caused him to miss 7 games. And he's expected for training camp. This just seems to be more precautionary than anything, given their lack of depth at receiver. In news I consider far more concerning for the Lions wideout group, Kenny Golladay still isn't doing team drills or individual work at OTAs, and he just had a chest injury in week 17 last year, so that's a long time to be dealing with a chest injury. This news blurb goes on to say that his status for training camp isn't in doubt, but that is somewhat concerning to me, having a chest injury linger for that long. Again, they could just be taking things very safely since they have no proven receivers outside of those 2 in Amendola, but I was surprised to see this story. Jerick McKinnon isn't playing in OTAs right now, running back for the Niners. Neither is Matt Breida, who partially tore his pec, or Raheem Mostert. McKinnon had an ACL tear last year right before the season, and he should be ready for training camp, but Tevin Coleman is definitely the favorite to get the most touches behind that great run-blocking offensive line. The very next news blurb says that they expect Tevin Coleman to receive the most touches among the 49ers running backs this year. Who'da thunk it? On Monday, we talked about how the Raiders need to fill their hole at left guard after Kaleki Osemele left the Raiders in free agency, and they signed an absolute head case in Richie Incognito, who's been out of the league for a couple years because of off-field fights, going to a mental health facility, and this is nothing more than a flyer based on how crazy he is, or at least has been. Maybe he's better now, but he's got a crazy history with a lot of violence off the field. So this is a classic Raiders move, and it could pan out. He is a good player. He's always been a great player, but this is kind of odd to me that they would keep adding character concerns to their team at this point. The new quarterback of the Jaguars, Nick Foles, is not participating in OTAs this week because of personal reasons. This is most likely a death in the family, which is unfortunate, but this should not affect his fantasy or dynasty status either way. Far more concerning news and highly relevant to today's topic of discussion, Miles Sanders is not participating in OTAs with an undisclosed injury. So first off, I never like when rookies are injured before they've even stepped on a field with the team, but right now we simply don't know what the injury is, so it's hard to speculate on what this means. It could be he had to get an x-ray, it could be a hamstring tear, we really don't know at this point. The Titans quarterback Marcus Mariota plans to play 12 to 13 pounds heavier than he did last year at around 230 pounds. This is good news for those of you holding on to Mariota in your dynasty leagues. He has had a concerning injury history, and I feel he's always needed to add more weight, and now that's finally happening. This is only his 5th season, even though it seems like he's been in the league for years, so I think the concerns about his demise are very overblown, especially with the recent addition of A.J. Brown and the fact that he couldn't feel his arm for the majority of last season due to nerve damage, but he's still a major question mark. He's had to deal with a lot of different offensive coordinators, so this is a pivotal year for him, but him staying healthy is the first key to that, and this is a good sign. As we talked about in temper expectations for TJ, the Lions offensive coordinator Darrell Bevell is a big believer in the run coming over from Seattle, and he spoke about that today, stating that they'll always be about running the football, want to be a tough, hard-nosed, physical football team, and exert their will on their opponents. So this points even farther into my guess that the Lions are going to try to run the ball heavily next season. While Kerryon Johnson benefits most from this news, perennially underrated CJ Anderson will help spell him for touches. Both of these players have injury concerns, and either one going down would boost the other one's stock, but hopefully both remain healthy to maximize their ground output, since they don't have much depth behind them in that running back room. The Saints signed Buck Allen, running back formerly of the Ravens. The Saints worked out a bunch of backs last week, and he must have been the best of the bunch. This is slightly concerning for my Divine Ozigbo hype, but I'm honestly not very worried. He's more of a receiving specialist at this point, and if Ozigbo were to become fantasy relevant, he would be the Mark Ingram role more than the Kamara role. I would see this more as a backup to Kamara / adding an extra viable pass catcher to that offense. But I highly doubt this impacts fantasy, either dynasty or redraft next season. Connor Williams, who was a tackle out of Texas last year, moved to guard and didn't play very well last year, but he's added 15 pounds in the offseason, which should help him be more effective at guard. I really did like his film in college. I'm trying to learn more about the offensive line because of how impactful it is for all of the fantasy players' production, and I'm hoping understanding all the names of the offensive linemen and watching them more is going to give me an edge in my ability to properly set lineups and recommend which lineups you guys should set once we actually start to be playing some football. The biggest situation that needed to be resolved for my beloved Broncos was Chris Harris signing a deal, which he did today after we increased his salary from $8.9 million to $12.05 million. Apparently, he just wanted to be the highest paid corner or defensive back on the team, which they agreed to by giving him $50,000 more than Kareem Jackson, who was signed from Houston last year, and honestly looks like he's going to play more safety for us than corner. This is huge for the Broncos defense as a whole, as without Chris Harris, it would almost certainly be a worse team. I really wish we could have signed him for at least 2 or 3 years, but we're just going to have to go through this drama when free agency hits next season. But since he was an undrafted free agent, I do expect Chris Harris to leave the Broncos next year, as he's most likely trying to make up for the high play that he delivered at a cheap price for years in Denver, and no one can really blame him for that. That's all the news we've got today. Now let's talk about the situation that surrounds Miles Sanders in Philly. At wide receiver, they've got Alshon Jeffrey, who's 29 and is a contested catch specialist plus. He can run some other routes outside of being a contested catcher, but that's really where he makes his bread and butter. He's got significant injury concerns and a long injury history. In 2018, he played 13 games with 92 targets for 7.1 per game, got 65 catches, 843 yards, and 6 touchdowns. His 16-game pace would have been 113 targets, 80 catches, 1,037 yards, 7 touchdowns, with 13 yards per route, 9 yards per target, 13 yards per touch, and a 71% catch rate. Since he's been in Philly, his 2-year average is 106 targets at 7.3 per game, 61 41 catches, 816 yards, 8 touchdowns, and a 58% catch rate. The concerning thing about Jeffrey is that he's only played 16 games twice in his 7-year career, with injuries that include a rotator cuff tear, grade 3 hamstring tear, grade 2 hamstring strain, grade 1 hamstring strain, and a knee tear that cost him 2 games, which to me means most likely an MCL, and a fractured hand. The second leading target getter of the receivers last year was Nelson Agholor, who is entering his 26-year-old season. He's a route runner with questionable hands, and he played 16 games for the first time ever last year thus far in his 4-year career. He got 97 targets for 6.1 per game, 64 catches, 736 yards, 4 touchdowns, with 12 yards per route, 8 yards per target, 12 yards per touch, and a 66% catch rate in 2018. He's a solid yet unspectacular player that is likely at or near his peak production and healthy season range, and he'll likely play a little more slot this year since they added Deshaun Jackson. This 33-year-old receiver is a pure deep threat that's approaching the end of his career. He's only finished a full season twice out of 11 times, and he's returning to the team that drafted him in the Philadelphia Eagles. Last year in Tampa Bay, he played 12 games, accruing 74 targets at a 6.2 per game pace, 41 catches, 774 yards, and 4 touchdowns. He'll help the offense by stretching the field with speed, and his 3-year average of 13 games finished results in 88 targets, 49 catches, 816 yards, 4 touchdowns with 16 yards per route, 9 yards per target, 15 yards per touch, and a 56% catch rate. I think these 3-year averages are likely to decrease, which will result in a very unstable fantasy player for redraft and lineup setting purposes. The Eagles' addition of J.J. Arcega-Whiteside in the draft, who's a 22-year-old receiver out of Stanford, drafted 57th overall in the 2nd round, is going to take some of those deep shot targets away from both Jackson and Jeffrey. He was my pre-draft wide receiver 11 and a tier 2 wide receiver. He's a contested catch specialist who excels at boxing out defenders at the catch point, but he has highly concerning agility on film and no agility testing to prove otherwise. At his pro day, he did impress me with a 4.4940, considering his 6'2", 225-pound frame, but his lack of agility worries me. His lack of burst throughout his routes worries me, because I don't know if that's going to allow him to become more than just a jump ball guy in the NFL. He's got the ability to win with both finesse and power releases off the line of scrimmage, which I do think is going to help him play in year 1, but I think he's being a little overdrafted right now with an ADP of 19th overall, based on how crowded that receiving room is for target share. I don't fault anyone for taking him there if they believe in the player. I would just rather have a lot of tight ends than I would a 6'2" contested catch specialist with agility concerns, but I can see the argument. I don't think he's going to play the slot because of his movement issues, but he could see some meaningful year 1 snaps when you look at the injury histories of those other receivers we just mentioned that are ahead of him on the depth chart. All the rest of the Eagles receivers are Jags and unlikely to see much time this year. The only one I kind of like is Mac Hollins, as he does intrigue me, but he is still working his way back from core ab muscle surgery. The Eagles' tight ends include Zach Ertz, who is 29, entering his 7th season as a former 2nd round, 35th overall pick of the Eagles, and he had a career year last year with 156 targets at a 9.8 per game pace for 116 catches, 1,163 yards, and 8 touchdowns. This led to 10 yards per route, 8 yards per target, 10 yards per touch, and a 74% catch rate. I do think his numbers could dip slightly with the continued development of Goddard, but his 3-year average with Wentz at QB is still 124 targets, 89 catches, 934 yards, and 7 touchdowns, which everyone would be happy with starting as their fantasy tight end. His backup is Dallas Goedert, entering his 24-year-old campaign and his 2nd year as an NFL player, being the 49th pick of the Eagles in the 2nd round a year ago. He only had 44 targets, or 2.8 per game, 33 catches, 334 yards, and 4 touchdowns last year, but the camp reports have been overwhelmingly positive, and he was my first overall tight end as a prospect last year. When you factor in Carson Wentz's affinity for throwing to the tight end position, I could see him being very fantasy relevant with the overall state of tight end play around the league right now. The Eagles' backfield got a new addition this year, trading a 6th-round pick for Jordan Howard, entering his 25-year-old campaign, formerly of the Bears, and entering his 4th year in the NFL. He's an early down bruiser with great vision and can catch, but he did regress last year in an offense that was about as poorly suited for his play style as you could imagine. Even so, he had 250 carries for 935 yards, which is 3.7 per carry, 9 touchdowns, adding 20 catches for 145 yards, resulting in 7 yards per route, 6 yards per target, and a 77% catch rate. Over his 3-year career with the Chicago Bears, he averaged 260 carries, 1,123 yards, 4.3 yards per carry, and 8 touchdowns each season. He's being wildly ignored this year with the addition of Miles Sanders to the backfield, but the Eagles have shown that they use their backs to their strengths and that they will use a pounder when the situation calls for it. While I do expect his total carries to drop a little bit, Howard landed in an excellent spot to continue his fantasy relevance and will likely be a thorn in the side of those expecting Sanders to receive a 3-down role in 2019. Josh Adams is a 23-year-old undrafted free agent from Notre Dame, entering his 2nd year, and he actually led the backfield last year with 120 carries for 511 yards, which is 4.3 per carry, 3 touchdowns, but only added 7 catches for 58 yards and a 54% catch rate in the passing game. He's almost certainly relegated to 3rd-string duties with the additions of Howard and Sanders. Corey Clement and Wendell Smallwood are both 25 years old, and they formed the pass-catching component of the Eagles' backfield a year ago. Combined, they had 155 carries for 623 yards, resulting in a 4 yards per carry clip with 5 touchdowns. They also received 60 targets for 50 catches, 422 yards, 2 touchdowns, with an 83% catch rate. The other 2 backs on the roster right now are Donnell Pumphrey and Boston Scott, and they haven't done anything in their NFL careers yet and likely won't. Boston Scott could, based on the positive reports out of Saints camp last year, but if they let him go, to me that's an indicator that they didn't see a real future for him in that offense. The Eagles' quarterback is Carson Wentz, who is entering his 4th year at 27 years old and is the former 2nd overall pick of the 2016 draft. He threw for 3,074 yards and 21 touchdowns during 11 games last year with a 102 passer rating. If you extrapolate those numbers out to 16 games, he would have had 4,471 yards and 31 touchdowns. Over his 3-year career, he finished only his rookie season, picking up a back fracture, rib fracture, wrist fracture, LCL, and ACL tear along the way. Him staying healthy is going to be the key for this team, especially with Foles jettisoned off to Jacksonville, but Wentz does average 3,400 yards, 23 touchdowns, and a 93 passer rating over his career. If he can play 16 games, I'd expect his numbers to be closer or better than his 16-game pace from last year than his 3-year average. He's a quarterback that loves the tight end, but he will extend plays with his mobility and pocket elusivity to take downfield shots. Additionally, the pass game running back for the Eagles has been fantasy relevant since Wentz has taken over, and it's a trend that I expect to continue. Last year, the Eagles were 7th in pass yards per game, but 18th in points per game, while also being 7th in the league in passing attempts per game. Part of this was due to a regression in the play of the offensive line, who were 17th in pass protection, 19th in creating yards for their running back, 25th in power success rate, and bottom half in all other run metrics. They did add a first-round tackle at pick 22 this year in Andre Dillard out of Washington State, and did not lose any starters in free agency. They also added 6 undrafted free agents to this position group, which should likely be about the same as last season, but they could possibly improve if one of the undrafted free agents step up to help out their guard play. In 2018, the Eagles' offense was 14th in yards per drive, 13th in points per drive, 4th in time of possession per drive, and were the 10th most pass-happy team with only 39.9% of their plays being a run. I currently don't see any reason why this play call percentage will change much next year, outside of now having better talent carrying the football in Jordan Howard and Miles Sanders. The Eagles' defense was 10th to last in yards allowed per game last year, but they were 12th in points per game allowed, 7th in rushing yards allowed per game, and 3rd to last in passing yards allowed per game with a 9-7 record. In free agency, they lost defensive end Michael Bennett, defensive tackle Haloti Ngata, defensive end Chris Long, and middle linebacker Jordan Hicks. The thing the Eagles need is secondary health, which was non-existent last season, in order to improve their overall unit. In the draft, they only added a 4th-round defensive end, Sharif Miller, and 5 undrafted free agents. I don't see any reason for this unit to improve this season unless their corners and secondary can stay healthy, as they were picked apart in that area last year. Their head coach is Doug Peterson, an Andy Reid disciple who is entering his 4th season as head coach of the Eagles at 51 years old. So far, he's got a 29-19 record with 5 postseason appearances and has a 4-1 record with a Super Bowl win in the playoffs. He's definitely one of the better head coaches in the league, especially offensively, as his teams have been top 11 in rushing yards 2 of his 3 years and top 11 in passing yards 2 of his 3 years. In each year that he was below that mark in one of the categories, either rushing or passing, the other side was top 11. The additions of Howard and Sanders are a clear indication that they hope to be better than 28th in yards on the ground as they were a year ago. They do have a first-year offensive coordinator in Mike Groh, but this offense runs through Peterson and by his design. Jim Schwartz is a competent defensive coordinator, but he has shown the tendency to resist changing his scheme even when his players can't execute it. Now let's move on to Miles Sanders, the player. My pre-draft running back 5 was taken in the 2nd round at 53rd overall by the Eagles, and he was my highest ranked tier 2 running back. He's 5'10.5", 211 pounds, with 9.25 inch hands and a 74.625 inch wingspan. He's a middle of the pack 22.08 years old, with below average weight divided by height, span divided by height, and hand divided by height metrics. At the combine, he ran a 4.4940, which was above average, and he had a great 3-cone of 6.89 seconds and a great 20-yard shuttle of 4.19 seconds. He also added above average 36-inch vertical and 124-inch broad jump. Sanders showed some good things on film, including nice lateral jump cuts, hands catching ability, good athleticism, good stop-start ability, good burst and speed. He showed that he can use power or agility to beat defenders, not just one. He has good vision and patience in the backfield, good head fakes in his routes, and on one play he showed good hustle, becoming a tackler on an interception, which displays to me the will to win the game. He won't get juked side to side in pass protection due to his good lateral agility. He does have good awareness at times in pass protection, and he's got good awareness of how many yards he needs to move the chains or score the touchdown. As with all prospects, he did show some bad qualities. He's lackadaisical in most of the routes he runs. He doesn't have a high football IQ in the passing game right now. He gets lost in pass protection too often. He tries to bounce outside too often, fumbles the ball way too much, and he lacks the football IQ of knowing what the players around him are doing, which caused multiple fumbles due to him motioning too early or issues at the handoff/mesh point with the quarterback. He's got a lot of work to do in his pass pro form and consistency. He could not outrun Devin Bush. Remember, we talked about that with Divine Ozigbo, so it's not really too huge of a negative thing if you like Divine Ozigbo. If you hate Divine Ozigbo because he got caught by Devin Bush, well, so did Miles Sanders. I do have some concerns with his reaction time and football IQ when the play is underway. He fails to outrun or stiff arm all defenders to the edge. He lacks elite breakaway speed, and he carries the ball in his inside arm consistently. While that can be taught, it's concerning that someone that puts the ball on the ground as much as he does doesn't even follow that high school level habit. So based on the situation, his measurables, and his film, where should he be taken in rookie drafts? While Sanders does have talent and very good athletic ability, it's not great. He's a liability in pass protection and ball security right now, and the Eagles seem to give more touches to backs that are the best in those two areas. When you combine this with him now mysteriously missing OTAs, it makes me pretty worried. Jordan Howard is a type of back that most fantasy owners wish did not exist, but I'm going to be shocked if he doesn't get at least 200 carries this year. The offense could be productive enough and pass happy enough for Sanders to be fantasy relevant, but I don't see him even removing Smallwood and Clement from the offense, let alone Jordan Howard, and becoming the 3-down workhorse that he's currently being drafted as. He simply isn't reliable right now. He's going to turn the ball over too much with his affinity for fumbling and failure to protect the quarterback. Even if you decide he's going to stop fumbling and learn how to pass protect, he's still very inexperienced as a route runner. While I do like Miles Sanders more than Josh Jacobs pre-draft, I feel both were overdrafted by the NFL due to positional scarcity, and they're going to be overdrafted due to the same reason in Dynasty rookie drafts. He's got an ADP, average draft position of 4 right now, and I don't see how he could possibly return production for that investment this year unless Howard gets a season-ending injury along with at least one of Smallwood or Clement. I do like his long-term ceiling, but he's got a much more difficult path to touches right away than Jacobs, and he is not technically ready for a head coach to trust him as a 3-down back. Not right now, and most likely not at any point this season with the amount of things he needs to improve upon. If it were just one area, it would be less concerning, but it's multiple areas that will take your offense off the field and allow the other team a chance to score, and head coaches that are smart won't do that. If you are going to take him, you need to be taking him with 2020 in mind and not 2019. If you need running back production right now, I'd much rather trade down from 1.04 and pick up underrated producers like Austin Eckler or even Jordan Howard, combined with 2020 picks or some post-hype running back prospects like Ronald Jones or Royce Freeman. Be much more willing to take that gamble on Ronald Jones than Royce Freeman, as I believe Lindsey is the real deal. I do not think Peyton Barber is the real deal. I do see how Sanders could be an above-average fantasy back in that offense after a year or two, especially in PPR formats, but I would not take him until the very late first or early second round. I definitely wouldn't until we know more about his injury that is causing him to miss OTAs, and for someone that needs this much technical work in order to become an every-down starter, this lost time is going to affect him. So, don't hate the player. I like some of the things I see, but I don't think he's going to be producing as much as people expect right away, and I'd much rather try to game the draft pick value system to find running back production than invest such a high pick into Miles Sanders. On Thursday, we're going to be going over Jace Sternberger of the Packers, the tight end that they recently drafted. Friday, we're going to go over Darrell Henderson of the Rams and examine that situation. And on Saturday, we're going to have a full breakdown of the Arizona Cardinals as a team while talking about their new rookies as we go. Since they drafted about 17, that's probably going to be a long episode. Your songs of the day today, the happy song is Dosed by the Red Hot Chili Peppers, and the football song of the day is The Mob by Lil Wayne. As always, those YouTube links will be in your episode description. Wanted to thank everyone for listening, and reach out to me if you've got questions or if you're looking for an opportunity to become a fantasy football writer. My most recent writer had some things come up in his personal life and he doesn't have the time anymore. I would rather focus on making the audio content than taking the time to write articles. So reach out to my email if that interests you. And I'm also looking for some people who know how to use Instagram and Twitter and social media that could help me out in that department. Just hit me up via email found in this episode description. As always, you've been listening to Dynasty 365, where the film will set you free.
So much trouble, it's not my fault, all this I also lose my friends, I lost my baby that was smoking crack, only today want to change. He wanted so I couldn't try what I to feel. I'd skill the grill, take your life in a second. The devil drinks coffee in my kitchen, I mentioned in every song, I just wanted to go away. You decide to stay in the well. I want to be forgiven, I don't like to skip for money. Sorry I was scared, you're not the way it feels. Like to sleep waiting for someone to come. everything is dark now. We're not friends of anything. Cause they're gonna kill anyone that feels so powerful. They trip by you, I read your skin of everything is confusing. You will be good, but you will be more.